Every year, we get anime that never fails to leave us speechless. It's no surprise that there has been a year-on-year growing interest in anime. But is it suitable for learning Japanese? Short answer, yes. Don't worry, we'll go into the arguments debunking why it isn't. But the question that I want to answer in this video is how exactly should we learn from anime? As a current teacher in training, I've been looking into a few theories into how people learn. So if you're also wondering how to best learn Japanese from anime, let's dive in. The versatility of anime means that unlike a lot of other resources, anime is almost a hack to getting infinite Japanese immersion. Matt vs Japan, who you might know as another language expert on YouTube, personally used anime in his own language journey. He makes the point that anime is sufficient enough to supplying you with the basics of Japanese. And the only unnatural things are the way characters would end their sentences, like their weird quirks you might hear sometimes. He then says this.
Once you use anime to build up a strong foundation in the language, then simply by listening to natural unscripted Japanese for a couple weeks, you'll easily be able to shift the way that you speak in order to sound natural. 最初は信じられないかもしれないんですけど、僕がその証拠です。
I'm sure there are some rebukes in chat. If anime can literally make you fluent, why am I not fluent despite watching anime for over a decade of my lifetime? Let's unpack that. People like to talk on and on about immersion. I'm also part of that problem. Immersion is basically us saying, go throw yourself into the language, swim in it in a little bit, and hopefully come out Nihongo jozu. You can see why that tip doesn't work, because I'm sure there are many people out there who have been watching anime since 11 years old, and other than remembering the JoJo memes, we struggle to hold an actual conversation. And this is where the Constructivism theory comes in. Constructivism theory basically says that the better your prior knowledge, the more things we can learn. Prior knowledge forms the basis for our learning. In other words, learners actively build on knowledge they already have and what they already know. And this is why you might have seen a spiral curriculum in school. For example, why can you still multiply and divide in maths? You start with your basic timetables, and year on year, you build up on that skill through algebra, graphs, calculus, differentiation, that kind of stuff. And so it stays with you for life. So, how does this tie in with learning from anime? The reason why a lot of us struggle to pick up new words from anime is because our prior knowledge simply is lacking. If you start watching murder mystery and supernatural anime, the complexity of the Japanese is up here, but our knowledge is down here at the bottom. And so this massive gap in skill level, unfortunately, it's just skill diff, and we end up not learning. This is where the main argument against learning Japanese from anime comes from.
Don't learn Japanese from anime, at least not right away. It seems like a fun way to practice, but if you're just starting out, you won't understand enough for it to be worthwhile.
So Yuta, who is also a very cool Japanese teacher on YouTube, also mentions this and recommends learning hiragana, katakana first, basic grammar, which you can, pick up from your Genki textbooks. I use personally Mina no Nihongo. If you're learning hiragana and katakana, just go through the Quizlet pre-made decks and just play the games over and over, and you'll learn it in 1 or 2 days. But after you've got the basics down, then you can build on it more easily. Take the most basic sentence, watashi wa yuna desu. After seeing a lot of wa patterns, then you can start building on into the negative. Watashi wa yuna janai desu. As you can see, we can start building schemas in our brain where new knowledge latches on to previous knowledge. And the idea is that it kind of mimics how our brain works, because, it's like a neural network and it's all interconnected, that kind of vibes. And also, by constantly recapping the basics, like seeing what many, many times, reinforces the prior knowledge and in turn makes new things easier to learn. Step 1 is consolidate the basics, learn the basic grammars, know how to read hiragana and katakana, and then we can start talking about anime. This doesn't mean give up on anime if you can't read Japanese yet. Any immersion is good immersion. And also, if you enjoy the anime, just go watch. It's great to keep your motivation levels high. After you've learned your basic scripts, the sky is your limit. And when you're at the stage of comprehending basic phrases, that's when you actually start trying to understand spoken language. And one of the best ways to do that is through today's sponsor, LingQ. Developed by Steve Kaufman, who is a very successful polyglot on YouTube, and I actually steal advice from. LingQ is a platform where you can learn your languages using your favorite content such as podcasts, films, YouTube videos, Netflix. With over 42 different languages available and also content spanning from beginner all the way to advanced, it's perfect for anyone who's committed to language learning. If the content doesn't suit your tastes, you can always import your own, which you can see right here, which means you have full control over your own learning. How does LingQ differentiate from other immersion type platforms? LingQ focuses specifically on reading, which means there are many optimizations to make your reading more seamless and effective, such as, for example, their color coding feature as you read. These color codes differentiate how well you know a certain word compared to the others. And this is a massive help in helping you identify which vocabulary you should be focusing on. Another issue that I faced is there are so many podcasts out there, but it's so difficult to get their transcripts. LingQ directly solves this issue because when you import a new video, it will automatically generate a transcript for you. Additionally, with the pop-up dictionary, my reading flow does not get disrupted. And we all know how distractions can lead to demotivation. So I not only learn from anime, but I also love learning from podcasts. But while I just passively listen and absorb, LingQ transforms these content into immersive lessons, which lets you engage with the words more and even create your own flashcards, which is exactly the type of complexity that our brain loves to retain more information. And we'll get to that later on in this video. By adding LingQ as another tool to aid your Japanese learning with anime, you can start picking up the language through multiple different sources and contexts, which has proved to be extremely effective. I think it's a great platform for people who want to have a bit more autonomy in their learning. So feel free to click the link below to check out LingQ today. Thank you very much to LingQ for sponsoring today's video. Alright, so after we get the basics down, now it's time to dip our toes into anime, right? Slowly and surely. According to cognitive load theory, we actually want to make learning hard. Yeah, that's the theory. In a nutshell, our brains love complexity. And I'm not talking about quantity of information here. I'm talking about the richness of information we receive. So don't worry, we're not gonna force you to memorize thousands of pages of grammar or memorize kanji. That's not effective. What we need to understand is richness of information, because that's pretty vague. I personally define it as information that resonates directly with us. It's learning things that have a lot of connections to our prior knowledge, and we want to maximize the amount of connections we make. Another thing that you should do with information is we want to make it interfere with our prior knowledge. That could either be adding on to existing piece of information in our mental minds, or pruning information, or editing them. Like if we have misconceptions and we relearn. AKA, it must take a lot of effort for us to learn. So if we relate this to anime, there are two things that we need to keep in mind. One, we want to make sure we're learning from anime that is suited to our level so we don't overwhelm ourselves with the quantity of information. And number two, we want to make our learning effortful. Regarding number one, you probably heard about comprehensible input. You need to basically understand around 80% of a content that you're learning from. I personally use the Pokemon episodes because I find it nostalgic, but I also asked some native Japanese speakers, and these are the anime they watched when they were in primary school. So if you want to learn like a native, go ahead and check those out. Usually online, it's recommended that you learn from slice of life anime because they give you more day-to-day vocabulary. But now, the interesting part is, how do we learn effortfully? How do we get information from our working memory all the way to our long-term memory effectively? Watching anime, turns out, is pretty effective, because you actually undergo something called dual coding, which is where your brain is processing two things at the same time. You get the visual cue from anime as well as the audio cue at the same time. This allows our brain to make stronger connections. But that's not enough. So another technique is chunking. This is where we actually slow learning down by learning a smaller amount of Japanese at a time to make sure that we've drilled in what we've learned. And we want to make this step as hard as possible. We want to make our brain as engaged as possible. One of the techniques that was recommended to me was from Tanaka-san and Iro na Nihongo, which is you start off watching anime with subtitles, then you switch off the subtitles and you try to write out the subtitles yourself through just dictation, and then you check what you've learned in case of any misconceptions or mistakes. This way, we can review vocab that we've learned previously and seen it in a different context, as well as learn new vocabulary. I personally limit myself to maybe 10 sentences per session because I don't want to overwhelm myself. And the retrieval of words plus the dual coding of anime makes this exercise extra effortful. But now that we've learned it, now we need to talk about the next part, which is repetition. So as language learners, we're told to do this thing called space repetition. And usually this is kind of combined with flashcards. And we end up having piles and piles of Japanese vocab. And then we start hating learning Japanese and then we quit. That's the story of my life. Which begs the question, are flashcards really the only thing we can depend on? Because we've all learned our first language without using these flashcards and grinding them every day, right? So to answer that question, let's understand how space repetition came to be. We're going to be exploring Bjork's theory of disuse. So let's state the obvious. We know that we forget things like vocabulary and grammar. That's why we're here, right? To know how to not forget things. But do we actually fully forget them? Because think about some generic anime that you've watched like 3 years ago. We remember the hot anime characters, but not necessarily the plot. So we do remember some things. And if someone was to play like an episode of that anime again, you'd probably recognize a few scenes here and there. So actually, we don't forget them fully. Bjork argues that with disuse, we don't lose the memories, we actually lose the access, the pathways to that memory. He basically differentiates two things, storage strength and retrieval strength. So if we take retrieval strength for a bit, retrieval strength is how easily we access some piece of information. For example, if you see an ice cream truck, you're going to be reminded of your matcha ice cream. Retrieval strength is affected by your environment, your emotions, and basically that kind of stimuli. Storage strength is how entrenched or interlinked this information is with your other items in the memory. Basically, it's how well you've learned this information, which we talked about in our previous step. But wait, don't you see the problem with flashcards here? Because flashcards seem to be leaning more towards the retrieval strength. You have your translation cues and image cues on a card, and then you're just asked to translate them back into Japanese. So then when it's actually time to use these words in conversations, you forget them because you no longer have these cues. Okay, but there's Anki, right? How come Anki works so well? So the difference with Anki is they include something called space repetition, which is basically where you space out retrieval at optimal times. Bjork also agreed with this. He found that having longer spaces between your retrieval actually leads to increased retention over the long term. So if you have a test tomorrow, you still got to cram. But if we're thinking long term, the longer you leave a gap between retrieving it again, the better you will retain it. But why does longer retrieval work? So with more forgetting, we actually empty out space for us to learn new things. I think about decluttering your room. You basically have more space for new things. It turns out by having more space to make new connections to new things will actually give us a better performance. This is awesome. Why? Because it means Anki is not the only solution for us. We just need space to forget something and relearn it. So what we can do with anime is we can combine it with other resources and vary our learning. I recently started listening to the Bite-Sized Japanese podcast, and sometimes I will come across words that I found in my anime study sessions. Now that I've encountered this word or grammar pattern more times, my mental model of it just becomes tsuyoku naru. Anki ticks the box for space repetition, yes. But I don't personally use Anki myself. At some point, Anki simply becomes easy retrieval because of the certain cues that we've talked about previously. And to prevent blindly recognizing cues, we want variation. So this can be through different media, learning resources, and having conversations with different people. Now, since the word or grammar pattern becomes associated with more cues, it is much easier to use them generally in day-to-day. We basically want to forget things so that we can learn it again. And the more times you relearn it, the better you will remember it. What helped me the most was coming to terms that not every word or grammar pattern has to be remembered right now. If it's important, it will crop up in another anime episode or another podcast episode. It's not that deep. I'll just relearn it then. You don't need to grind flashcards every day to fully optimize everything. And you don't need to worry if you miss a day, alright? Just pick it up the next day. It's totally okay. Having such set rules on yourself can burn you out if you don't find it enjoyable. So go slow, take it one at a time, try out different resources, watch loads of things, go talk to a lot of people, and you'll be just fine. I hope you all found this video helpful. Be sure to check out LingQ if you'd like to mix your anime learning with podcasts, news, videos, etc. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.